Welcome to our Entitledparents, where some ex-husbands find out that karma also wears steel-toed boots. This story starts the way almost every story about a deadbeat ex-husband begins, with an exhausted woe. A man convinced that the world is a 5-star hotel where he is a lifetime guest. Her name was Melissa, 34 years old, mother of 2, 3 different jobs in the last 4 years, and a level of patience that had expired at least a decade ago. The ex-husband, Ryan. Ryan was 37, had zero emotional stability, to specific talents, complaining and asking for money, and an almost supernatural ability to act like he was the true victim of his own incompetence. They were married for 9 years. 9 years. Enough time to realize that love doesn't conquer all, especially when all includes a man who believes that paying child support is a form of state oppression. The divorce happened after Melissa discovered that Ryan was borrowing money from the joint account to invest in a revolutionary project. This revolutionary project was a podcast that never even got off the ground, but he did buy the $800 gaming microphone. Priorities. After the split, Melissa managed to keep primary custody of the children. Ryan got alternating weekends, which, in practice, meant he would pick up the kids at 2 p.m., return them at 6 p.m., complain that he was exhausted. Taking care of his own children for 4 hours was described by him as a sacrifice. But the real show started 6 months after the divorce. Ryan decided that the child support was excessive, not because he couldn't afford to pay, but because, according to him, Melissa already worked too much and should learn to fend for herself. Double quotes. Yes, he actually said that. The same man, who still lived with his own mother. The mother, by the way, was a key piece in this opera. Donna Sandra sincerely believed her son was misunderstood, that Melissa had ruined his potential, that he was a visionary. The man who forgot to pay his own internet bill. Ryan started delaying payments, first a few days, then weeks. Then he simply ignored the messages. Melissa tried to keep her composure. She sent polite messages. Ryan, the school fees were due today. Ryan, I need the amount by Friday. Ryan, can you transfer it, please? The response was always loaded with theatrical indignation. You only talk to me to ask for money. You have no idea how hard this is for me. You're exploiting me. Double quotes. Exploiting. The woman who worked in an office in the morning, did online freelance work in the afternoon, and still helped the kids with homework at night. But wait, it gets better. One Saturday night, Ryan showed up at her house unannounced. He parked in front as if he still had a right to that driveway. Melissa opened the door, already feeling like something was about to turn sour. Ryan walked in talking loudly, as if he were in an imaginary political debate. We need to talk. It's never a good sign. He started saying he was legally evaluating the child support, that he had lawyer friends. That Melissa was taking advantage. She took a deep breath. Ryan, you haven't paid into months. He laughed out loud. Show, but you never acknowledge everything I do. What did he do? Was there a parallel universe where Ryan was an unsung hero? Maybe, because in the real universe, he didn't even remember the name of his son's teacher. The conversation escalated quickly. Ryan started talking too loud. The children heard him. Melissa asked him to lower his voice. He didn't. He took 2 steps forward, invading her space. He didn't touch her, but that movement was enough. That was the moment Donna Sandra entered the scene. Yes, because Ryan hadn't gone alone. His mother was in the car. She entered the house as if she owned the property. My son is being humiliated here. Humiliated. For having to pay child support. Melissa felt something different in that instant. It wasn't anger. It was that cold clarity. That perception that some people don't live in the same reality. Ryan started shouting that he wanted to cut the amount in half. Donna Sandra said Melissa should get another husband if she wanted money. And the children were in the hallway. Watching. Melissa asked them to go to their room. Ryan had the audacity to yell. They have the right to hear. It was exactly then that something shifted in the air. There were no hysterical screams. There was no dramatic crying. There was silence, a heavy silence. Melissa walked to the door and pointed outside. You are leaving my house. Ryan took a step forward again. Or what? That question. That tone. That relaxed arrogance of someone who has never faced a real consequence. Melissa picked up her phone. Not to record. To call. Ryan mocked her. Who are you going to call? The police. You're pathetic. She didn't answer. She just made the call. Meanwhile, Donna Sandra continued her speech about injustice, persecution, ingratitude. Ryan, perhaps realizing the theater wasn't going as expected, decided to shut the door to prevent her from closing it. It was a small mistake, but a decisive one. The police arrived, and when they arrived, Ryan was still shouting. He was still gesturing. He was still trying to argue that house was also his emotionally. The officer asked him to step back. Ryan talked back. He asked to speak man to man. The officer wasn't interested in masculine philosophy. He asked him to step back again. Ryan, the brilliant strategist, decided to argue out loud. In front of the patrol cars, in front of his children. In front of his mother. He was led away. Not handcuffed at that moment, but warned. That night ended with a formal warning for disturbance and attempted trespassing. Melissa thought that would be rock bottom. She was wrong. Because men like Ryan don't learn from warnings. They escalate. In the following days, the messages started. Long voice notes, veiled insults, indirect threats. You're going to regret this. You're messing with the father of your children. I have nothing to lose. That phrase is never accompanied by wisdom. Melissa saved everything. Every message, every audio, every threat. She stopped responding. She just documented it. Ryan started showing up at the front door again. He didn't come in, but he would park there. He would just sit and watch. A silent spectacle of intimidation. Donna Sandra, of course, posted passive-aggressive comments on Facebook about women who destroy families. And then the episode happened that no one on that street ever forgot. A Tuesday afternoon. Melissa was coming home from work. Ryan was sitting on the porch steps, waiting. She didn't say anything. She walked right past him. He stood up. We're going to settle this now. The tone was different. Harder. Less theatrical. He was agitated. The neighbors noticed. An elderly lady crossed the street. A man stepped out of his door. Ryan started shouting that she was stealing his children from him, that he was going to teach her a lesson. He grabbed her arm. To hard. Not for long, but hard enough. That was when Melissa's brother appeared. Marcos, a man who until then had kept his distance from the situation. He crossed the garden with long strides. Ryan was still holding her arm when he heard the voice behind him. Let go. Ryan turned. Marcos repeated, let go. Ryan let go. But he did the worst possible thing right after. He laughed. He laughed in his face and said, you're not going to do anything. That phrase, that empty confidence, that miscalculation. It was the exact moment. The story left the realm of humiliation and entered the territory of physical consequences. If Ryan had walked away at that moment, perhaps the story would have ended with a police report and a restraining order. But Ryan was never a man who knew when to stop. He was the type to poke a socket with a fork and then act surprised by the shock. Marcos wasn't an explosive guy. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't the kind of person who solved everything with force. But he had one characteristic that Ryan lacked, a limit. And Ryan had just crossed every single one of them. When Ryan laughed, that laugh heavy with disdain, something in the air shifted. It wasn't an immediate punch. It wasn't a cinematic explosion. It was worse. It was silence. Marcos took 2 steps forward. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just stared. Ryan, far too confident for his own good, threw his arms open as if to say, and, what are you going to do? He repeated. That phrase should come with a safety warning because it is almost always the last mistake before a disaster. Melissa stood frozen. The neighbors were watching, and Ryan, still wearing that crooked smirk, decided to add one more comment. This crazy woman only knows how to cry to the cops. The word crazy, said just like that. As if everything were a performance. Marcos didn't answer, but his body did. Ryan barely had time to finish his laugh before the first punch landed. Dry. Direct. No warning. It wasn't a choreographed sequence. It was brutal and fast. Ryan stumbled backward. The surprise was greater than the pain in those first few seconds. He put his hand to his face, and when he looked at his fingers, he saw blood. That was the moment the smile vanished. He lunged. Because proud men rarely know how to retreat. He tried to shove Marcos. He tried to regain his stance, but Marcos was already ready. The second blow was even more precise. Ryan fell sideways onto the grass. The neighbors started shouting. Someone said, call the police. Someone pulled out a phone. But it was already happening. Ryan tried to get up. He pushed his body up, supporting his weight on his arms. And then came the sound. The kind of sound no one ever forgets. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. A dry snap. Like porcelain breaking, Ryan put his hand to his mouth again, and this time, it wasn't just blood. It was something solid, something white, something that shouldn't be in the palm of his hand. He spat on the ground. The teeth fell with it. Too whole. The expression on his face was almost childlike. Confusion. Shock. Incredulity. As if the universe had committed a grave error against him, Marcos took a step back. He didn't continue. He didn't kick. He didn't humiliate. He just stood there, breathing heavily. Melissa was still standing there, motionless. As if watching a scene that had been years in the making, Ryan started to scream. But the scream came out strange. Slurred. Glitchy. Because he no longer had the structure to support his own arrogance. You're going to pay for this, he tried to speak, but his mouth was swelling fast, and his diction wasn't helping anymore. Donna Sandra came running from the sidewalk. My son, what did you do to my son? She fell to her knees beside him. Ryan spat more blood. Tried to get up again. Failed. That was when the police returned. To patrol cars. This time with sirens. And now the situation had changed tone completely. The officers separated everyone. Quick questions. Who started it? What happened? Was there a threat? Was there an assault? The neighbors spoke up. And when many neighbors say the same thing, the arrogant version loses its power. Ryan tried to say he was attacked out of nowhere, but the neighbor's security camera had already recorded the moment. He grabbed Melissa's arm. And had recorded the shouting. He had recorded him stepping into her space. The victim narrative began to dismantle right then, and an ambulance was called. Ryan was taken away with a swollen mouth to makeshift compresses and a completely shattered pride. Donna Sandra screamed about lawsuits, about compensation. About attempted murder. But the officers were more interested in the attempted intimidation and the recent history. Melissa gave her statement on the spot. Marcos did too. There was no arrest at that moment, but there was a formal filing for mutual battery with the aggravating factor of prior threats. And there was something even more important, an immediate request for a protective order. Ryan, at the hospital, discovered that in addition to the 2 lost teeth, there was a slight fracture in his jaw. Nothing permanent, but expensive. Very expensive. Emergency dentist. X-raised. Reconstruction. Preliminary estimate, several $1,000s. He tried to call Melissa that night. She didn't answer. He tried to send a text. He typed with difficulty, "You owe me this." She didn't reply. The next day, his lawyer got in touch and attempted a settlement. An attempt to resolve this amicably. But there was a problem. The protective order was granted on a temporary basis. Ryan could not go near the house. Nor Melissa, nor the children's school. And any contact had to be made solely through legal channels. The man who said he had nothing to lose now had plenty, his image, his money. And the most ironic part of all, new teeth paid for in 24 installments. But Ryan wasn't the type to learn from humiliation. He was the type to turn humiliation into revenge. In the following days, the alternative narrative began. Facebook posts, wrong fathers, persecuted men, violence against the modern man. The photos, he didn't post them because smiling was out of the question, but his friends started commenting. Sue them, don't let them get away with it. This is attempted homicide. Ryan fed into it because he had to. He needed to transform his own recklessness into martyrdom. Meanwhile, Melissa breathed for the first time in weeks. The house was silent. No car parked out front. No shadow on the porch. The children asked about their father. She answered calmly, "He's taking care of some things." She didn't lie, but she didn't expose them either. Marcos, on the other hand, was under a mild investigation for bodily harm, and he knew it. He knew he might have to answer to the law, but when the summons arrived, something curious happened. Ryan didn't want to follow through. He didn't formalize the complaint. He didn't insist. Why? Because opening a lawsuit meant opening up the history. It meant exposing the messages. It meant exposing the threats. It meant exposing the video of the initial assault. Ryan wanted money, not exposure. And his lawyer made that very clear. If we go forward, it could get worse. So he backed down. For the first time, but not completely. Because there was still one thing Ryan believed he could control, the child support. He decided to stop paying altogether. No more delays. No more promises. He simply stopped and he sent a single legal message. Via his lawyer, "We request an immediate review of the amount." It was the last move before the final fall. Because Ryan still didn't understand something essential. Some people can put up with shouting. They can put up with humiliation. They can put up with manipulation. But when you mess with their children, the game changes. Ryan thought losing the teeth was rock bottom. Was in single quotes T. It was just the trailer. Because the real problem wasn't the punch. It was the history. And history isn't erased with cold compresses. And Facebook drama. When he decided to stop paying child support for good, believing it would pressure Melissa, he did the legal equivalent of digging his own grave with a backhoe. Melissa was no longer in the discussion phase. She was in the documentation phase. Save messages. Save voice notes. Screenshots of threats. Neighbor security camera footage. Medical report of the bruised arm. Previous disturbance report. The protective order report. Ryan was playing emotional chess. Melissa was building a lawsuit. The hearing was set within a few weeks. And ironically, Ryan showed up impeccably dressed. Cheap suit, misaligned tie, and a carefully contained smile. Of course. Now with the temporary teeth. What no one tells you about temporary teeth is that they aren't perfect. They scream trauma. He spoke carefully. He articulated slowly. The judge asked him to explain the reason for the suspension of payments. Ryan took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I am going through financial difficulties, and I have been prevented from seeing my children." Prevented. That word almost made Melissa laugh. But she remained motionless. Her lawyer presented the timeline. Delays before the incident, refusal messages, offensive audio clips, attempts at intimidation. Then came the video. The room went silent. In the video, Ryan was grabbing her arm. In the video, he was lunging. In the video, he was laughing. And in the video, he was asking, "You're not going to do anything." The question echoed there in a different way. It was no longer a provocation. It was evidence. The judge watched until the end. Paused, looked at Ryan. "Do you understand that your own conduct contributed to the reaction?" Ryan tried to argue, but arguing without factual support is just theater. And theater doesn't convince a judge. The decision came out the same day. Full maintenance of child support. Retroactive fines for the unpaid months. A formal warning for intimidating behavior. Extension of the protective order to ensure distance. And something Ryan didn't expect, a recommendation for mandatory psychological counseling to maintain supervised visits. Supervised visits. The man who shouted that no one tells him what to do now had to see his children under supervision. Because the court understood that emotional instability and aggressive behavior do not mix with heal. Thy joint custody. Dona Sandra exploded in the courthouse hallway. This is an absurdity. But legal absurdities usually come accompanied by weak evidence. Ryan left in silence. No speech. No indignant livestream. No Facebook post that day. Because when pride breaks, it doesn't make an immediate noise. He began to feel the real weight days later. The child support block directly at the source. Part of his salary withheld automatically. Fixed judicial deduction. The "I'm going to stop paying" became "they're going to take it anyway." Then came the second impact. The company where he worked became aware of the protective order. Not through gossip, but because legal summons arrived formally. HR doesn't like employees involved in recurring legal conflicts, especially with a history of aggression. Ryan was called in for a talk. He wasn't fired at that moment, but he was warned. Corporate image, conduct, emotional stability, terms he never paid much attention to began to become reality. Meanwhile, Melissa was reorganizing her own life. There was no longer a car parked out front. There were no more screams on the porch. There were no more aggressive messages at 2 in the morning. there was routine, silence, and something that felt strange at first, peace. The children began to adjust. At first, they asked about their father. Then they began to realize that the supervised visits were calmer. No shouting. No pressure. No rants against their mother, because any inappropriate comment could be recorded. Ryan found himself forced to control himself for the first time. He tried to play the victim in the sessions, tried to say he was suffering persecution, but the supervisor noted everything down. No emotional reaction. Just the record. Ryan began to realize something cruel. He wasn't losing because of the punch. He was losing because of his own accumulated behavior. The punch was a consequence, not the cause, and then came the final blow, not physical. Legal. The retroactive fine plus legal cost plus dental treatment plus fees began to squeeze his budget. Ryan tried to ask his mother for help. Donna Sandra had already spent a good portion of her savings on the dental reconstruction. The narrative of my wronged son began to weaken. When the bills arrived, Facebook friends vanished because online indignation rarely pays the bills. Ryan filed a new request for review months later. Denied. Basis previous inappropriate conduct and the mother's proven stability. And there he realized what he might have understood sooner. Had he been less arrogant, he didn't lose his teeth by bad luck. He lost them because he believed there would never be a consequence. Melissa never celebrated the episode. She never went around telling the story as a trophy, but she also never apologized for what happened because, deep down, she wasn't the one who chose to escalate. He was Ryan tried to reach out a year later. This time it was different. No shouting. No threats. No laughing. He requested a formal conversation via a lawyer, said he wanted to get better. Said he was in therapy, said he wanted to rebuild the bond. And for the first time, he seemed sincere, but rebuilding trust is like rebuilding a broken tooth. It never goes back to exactly how it was. Melissa agreed to a gradual increase in visits. Supervised at first. Then off site. Always recorded. Always with a clear limit. Ryan learned to speak more softly, learned to measure his words, learned that grabbing someone's arm has a price, learned that laughing at the question or what can be expensive, and maybe, just maybe, he learned that being a father isn't about pride. It's about responsibility. The permanent teeth turned out well. Almost perfect, but every time he smiled too wide, there was a slight misalignment, a tiny asymmetry, a physical reminder that arrogance leaves a mark. On the street, the neighbors still talked. Some thought Marcos overreacted, others thought it wasn't enough. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ryan never parked there to intimidate again. He never raised his voice on that porch again. He never laughed that way again. And in the end, what really changed wasn't his smile. It was the power dynamic. Because entitled people count on one thing, that the other person will always back down, that the other person will always tolerate it, that the other person will always endure it until the day they don't anymore. And then, it isn't revenge. It's a limit. Now let me ask you something. If you were in the brother's shoes, would you have done it differently? Would you have held back? Or would you have waited for the next or what? To act. And more importantly, how many people only learn when they finally face a real consequence? If this story made you think, or gave you that feeling of this was a long time coming, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Where karma doesn't show up late, share this with someone who has dealt with an entitled ex who thought nothing would ever happen, because sometimes doing nothing isn't an option, and we still have a lot of stories to tell.